morning and welcome to this morning's LCRIG-led webinar entitled Advancing Safety Inspections, the Case for Change. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion, which is being delivered in association with Gaist. My name is Alex Peachy and I'm the Content Director for the local council Roads Innovation Group, and I'll be chairing today's session. We will be discussing the challenges facing local authorities in this area, and we would welcome audience questions, which we will get to as part of a Q&A session later. Please do send through questions in the question box that you'll see in the panel on the right-hand side. Safety remains a #1 priority for councils, and they must regularly inspect the roads that they're responsible for. The way in which these inspections are done can be time-consuming, but they're vital for keeping roads safe, and they provide authorities with critical evidence that's necessary for defending against claims. Technology can play an important role in advancing how these inspections are carried out and help move the sector away from traditional approaches. Traditionalists will always argue that you cannot beat the human eye, but anything that can be done to help assist humans making decisions should be welcomed. Capturing data which highlights safety defects across inspection routes can support decisions made by safety inspectors, and the benefits can be even wider than this. As part of the discussion today, our panel will consider some of the challenges and opportunities which will challenge councils to look holistically at their highway safety inspection regimes. So without further ado, I'll go on to introduce our panelists in a moment. Hopefully everybody can hear us okay. If someone can perhaps type something in the chat box just to let us know that we're being heard, or I'm being heard so far loud and clear, that'd be great. So our panel today is made up of Christina Leocides she's a senior consultant for professional services from Gaist. We have Nick Pates, who's a team manager for highway maintenance at Bristol City Council. We have Paul Boss, chief executive of the Road Surface Treatment Association. And we also have Steve Spender, who is the chief executive of the Institute of Highway Engineers. Thank you for joining us all today, everybody. So I'm going to start off by opening today's event by bringing all of our panelists into the conversation right from the outset. This will give them an opportunity to provide a thought or opinion on an opening statement or a question, just to set the scene and before we move further into the conversation. So the challenge is for them to consider the following statement and give their response or fill in the blank. I'm going to start off by coming to Paul to kick us off. And Paul, the first scene-setting question, if you like, is when we peer into the future, safety inspections will be carried out differently to how they are today. In 2030, we will see...
Well, thank you, Alec. So what we're not going to see is the traditional inspector usually now being driven in the passenger seat of a van with a tablet recording defects or walking along on a footway or remote footway recording their defects. What I think we will have is that the majority of the capture, if not all the capture, will be various video type capture, whether that be walking or driving, and then that will be looked at by a competent inspector, maybe in an office or even at home, going through those videos, looking for areas of interest, having a look at each defect, determining both its nature and its priority, and also the response time. Bearing in mind, health and safety, the need to improve that, sustainability, efficiency, and tighter scrutiny. So, yeah, I think that safety inspections at that time would be being recorded. Bearing in mind it's 9 years away, they may even be being recorded from the air by that time, but certainly it would be a video type capture, I believe, Alec.
Thank you for those opening comments, Paul. I think I'd probably like to go maybe to Nick next to offer the sort of local authority perspective on what you think things might look like in 9 years' time.
Thank you, Alec. We've seen technology develop really quickly over recent years. You know, right from using handhelds now to record and raise jobs directly with contractors through asset management systems, through to now using video technology or image technology to capture and record defects and areas of interest, like Paul had said. And I think that trend will continue. I'm not yet convinced about fully replacing all inspectors and the way we do that, particularly in an urban environment, with full image capture, whilst taking away the manual physical inspector undertaking walked inspections. But we're certainly seeing, and we'll talk about this later, I think, significant improvements from using technology in our driven inspections, certainly, and I don't see why that trend won't continue. I think what we're careful to ensure is that we use the technology as part of a wider package of local and engineer expertise to complement how we prioritise and issue our works, particularly how it fits into understanding planned maintenance programmes.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Should we come to Christina next? Do you want to offer your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with my colleagues. I think technology is there to make life more efficient, hopefully easier, but I don't think that completely negates the role of human decision making. So technology obviously advances very quickly nowadays, and there's not just sort of image technology, but it's also about connectivity and how you have that GPS signal, whether that's universal. So I think that sort of thing will accelerate across the country and make things easier in terms of sort of capturing the speed at which the capture of certain things is made through technology, and logging and storing and basing it through GIS, map-based, all that kind of easy way of telling what's going on in the network and in your locations. But I don't think it will fully replace human decision making in terms of either the strategic level, when you're looking at what you want to do with your network, either in terms of safety or longer term, or in fact for the ultimate decision making about whether something needs an immediate action or not. So yeah.
Thank you, Christina, and finally, Steve, do you want to offer up your thoughts and opinions on this forward-looking statement of what things might look like in 9 years' time?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Morning, everybody. I agree with my three colleagues on the panel that the use of technology going forward is going to, we're ever increasing use of technology. It's going to become the norm, as, if you like, video call meetings have become the norm at the moment. But we have become accustomed to great advances in the use of technology, and that can only benefit us. And I think that we will see that not only from inspection, data collection, as Paul mentioned, through to the way in which jobs are ordered, the way in which repairs are organised, they're prioritised and taken out. But I also tend to agree with Nick that we have to have one eye on where this can be used to its fullest and where it needs to just support some of the other aspects of inspections. We may not get away from walked inspections, particularly on footways and some of those remote areas, because it's going to be difficult to get mobile units in to do that. And hopefully technology will have moved on to such a pace by then that perhaps those sorts of areas can be looked at in some sort of data collection. But I think where we are now, we tend to look at our driven routes, higher speed roads, those where safety is a key importance, and the data that can be collected there is going to be an absolute godsend to all of us in terms of organising repairs, organising our priorities, but also organising our preventative maintenance and making sure that we can actually keep a better idea, a better record of what defects we've got on our network and what we need to do to keep them up to a satisfactory condition.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you all for those opening comments. And just going back to Nick quickly and reflecting on that opening statement, you talk about councils now, as you say, technology complementing what highway inspectors already do as the more traditional approach. But when you look ahead, I mean, in what ways do you think local authorities should keep preparing for that forward look? Is it just continually about embracing that technology?
Exactly. I think it is about embracing the technology. Obviously, working within the parameters of you still got to get the job done, and you've got to be careful about with the resources we face, whether that financial pressures or staff pressures. It can be difficult to sometimes test and trial new technology whilst you're trying to do the day job. So that has to be a consideration, but that shouldn't be a reason not to try and experiment with new ways of working. And we've seen real benefits, because of COVID and the position that put us in. We had to accelerate really our plans to use safety view with Gaist, and we've seen real success from that. So it's about embracing technology, understanding what it can do for you, and I think what's key in that is understanding and not being overwhelmed by the data. So often as authorities, we can collect so much data, and Bristol, we're quite fortunate to be a smart city, and we're using technology across the board really to collect information and data from numerous sources. And our struggle now is how we manage that data and making sure we use it for our needs. And it's not just something that sits on a shelf or sits in a cloud, or and it is practically used. And I think that's our challenge at the moment, is seeing where the need is, where the demand is, and having solutions to those.
Lovely, thanks, Nick. And Christina, again, same question to you in terms of how local highway authorities should be preparing. Nick talks about the importance of councils not being overwhelmed. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, and I see part of our role as a company supporting local authorities to assist with making data accessible, but also sorting through what data is really useful and how it can be used. And I think for councils, it's about being prepared maybe to work in stages, that there's no absolute magic solution just off the shelf. Behind every bit of technology is development, and behind that development are people. So I think it's embracing the art of the possible and then working towards shaping those improvements for the future. So we very much believe working in partnership with local authorities, because they're the people using the technology. It's got to work for them. And I think it's about supporting and involving staff in planning for the change, and looking at what elements can be introduced maybe immediately, what elements might need some more work either within the organisation, or looking at what kind of data or technology is the most helpful. And I think Steve earlier as well mentioned like high speed or highly traffic routes. That can be where the immediate gains become very apparent to staff on the ground, rather than just at a strategic level. So I think it's looking at what's most helpful and what's there already.
Right, thanks, Christina. And Steve, your thoughts, picking up on your fellow panelists' views of that point?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, the only way that this can progress is for local authorities to embrace what's available to them and to help support that development. Christina's absolutely right. Organisations such as Gaist and others can produce data collection, but it's how local authorities want to use it. It's how they want to embrace it, how much input they want in terms of helping to develop it. Now, an awful lot of new technology gets thrown at local authorities, and coming from a local authority background myself, it's sometimes difficult to balance spend on new development and balance spend on what you need to do to continue to deliver the services that you're delivering. And there is an absolute need for authorities to buy into that as a whole. There's also an absolute need for the larger authorities that can get fully engaged in these trials, to help support them, and then to support the other smaller authorities that might need a better understanding of how technology can help them, and perhaps help them with some of implementing that technology going forward. We need to make sure that as we start to take this on, that technologies have one eye on their policies and procedures, having a look to see what their highway inspectors, how their training might need to be adjusted, what better understanding they might need to have of what they're seeing on the screen in front of them, and sort of match that to the competencies that they already need to prove in terms of being a competent inspector and going out there and carrying out inspections. Absolutely, local authorities should be in this journey, and they should be getting involved in this journey with everybody else. I mean, the IHE through its Highway Inspectors Board should be, and we're beginning to get engaged with Christina and Gaist in terms of how we can help develop training that would support and help this sustained development going forward, to make sure that everybody can actually make best use of it.
Okay, thank you, Steve. That's great to hear. And finally, Paul, just on this scene setting question before we kind of move the conversation on, your thoughts on how local authorities should be preparing and embracing it, I guess, as we look towards the next 9 years or 9 years time.
Yeah, well, let's remember that local authorities are well used to change. I mean, it's something that they have to do all the time. So it's all about really, I think, setting out an initial plan. I mean, Steve mentioned about updating the highway inspection policy or reviewing it. So I mean, as a matter of course, most local authorities will be doing that every 3 years. So they should be looking at the next one and just making sure that they are preparing for a hybrid situation, so that their policy will allow them to receive digital recordings and be able to undertake their inspections in that way. But looking forward, the early planning, take the inspectors along with them. Make sure that they're looking at it. There's always a consideration about what's going to happen to jobs now. Without doubt, when you get technology, you need less people. But that will be a gradual change, and for some it will be an opportunity to move on and do other things. There will still need to be some inspectors in various roles, and that hybrid situation needs to be set out. But also look at things like vehicle replacement, what vehicles are going to be needed in the future, how long it's likely to take, and start talking to risk and insurance colleagues, so that everybody starts to get ready for this. But also, it doesn't need to be rushed. It shouldn't be rushed. There should be a plan for it, which is reviewed and have a look at how progress is going against that plan.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for your sort of opening contributions there. A great way to kind of set the scene, I think. And I want to move on now and bring Christina and Nick into this part of the conversation. Thanks for now, Paul and Steve. I'll bring you back into the conversation soon. I wanted to talk a bit more about obviously moving away from these traditional approaches to highway safety inspections, and actually picking up, I guess, on a point that Steve was just making there about the importance of councils embracing that move away. But firstly, why is there that need to move away from those traditional approaches? Christina, sorry.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot to be said about technology assisting with levels of consistency and with levels of auditability. So, part of the answer to that is because we can now, because the technology has advanced to a stage where it's supporting rather than hindering or being a lesser offering. But also, I think because there are issues with the traditional safety inspections, and I think part of that was thrown up very clearly and starkly by living through a pandemic, obviously where staff safety was paramount, and actually the traditional method of having 2 people in a car was practically impossible, particularly at the start of the lockdown. But also it throws up the inefficiencies of needing 2 people in a vehicle, to do that. So that's one element of it, I think. There have been legal challenges on traditional driven inspection methods in terms of, how effective is it, how much gets missed, how much gets seen. So again, using imagery to back up that decision making can be really, really useful. So I think it's about using technology to enhance what's being done in terms of the principles and the fundamentals, and actually looking at the bits that weren't so useful in traditional methods, so the inefficiencies or the challenges that could be made.
Thank you, Christina. And Nick, do you want to come in on that? And why is there a need to move away from these traditional approaches?
Thank you, Alex. So in the Bristol context, we, like many other projects, obviously had a driven inspection with 2 inspectors, and we had concerns sort of how that was undertaken and managed, and the defects that were being picked up, and the efficiencies of using 2 officers in a car that the authority had to maintain and own. And so we entered into the DFT and Gaist trial with Cumbria and Blackpool and a number of secondary other authorities for what was called Digital Inspector, which is now developed into the Gaist safety view. And what we saw from that was significant increase in the number of defects that were being picked up. And to be honest, that's partly due to human nature. I think when you get some inspectors in the cars, that they often do their job on their own, don't get a chance to talk much, and so maybe there are elements that are missed. Obviously, they're negotiating traffic and other things. Whereas with the digital, the safety view, it can be entirely focused and picked up on individual areas of interest, and they're then assessed by an accredited inspector. What we're seeing is initially we didn't see any time savings because of the way we were handling data. Bristol were doing the inspections with a camera on our vehicle, but now we've moved, because of the pandemic, moved over to the managed service from Gaist. We are seeing time savings in the way we've done it. We've now integrated it with our asset management system, so we're seeing significant time savings in the way we're undertaking our inspections. And that's not to say that it's replacement of jobs, because as probably most local authorities who are on this call know, we've got more work than we've got staff for. So it's just about reallocating that staff and providing a different sort of service. We're increasingly under pressure to provide service to complaints and issues. Licenses are increasingly being pushed onto sort of highway maintenance in that area, particularly in Bristol. So it's about reacting to that and being undertake sort of our fundamental basic job. The other element, what we're finding with using the technology, is the improvement we've got in understanding and managing the depreciation of our network. So seeing how defects develop, how they can break into larger pieces of work, and then inform our planned maintenance program, whether that be surface dressing, micro, or reconstruction. And we haven't really been using the knowledge of manual driven inspections were collated, but now we can use this information better and inform those programs. And what we're seeing now in Bristol is we moved away from revenue pressures because we're using revenue budgets for our manual driven inspections, but because we're being much more proactive in the way we maintain our strategic network using the Gaist safety view, we're actually able to justify that as capital spend. So we're seeing, that's probably saved us about £200,000 a year on our revenue budget, and we're seeing an improved condition of our strategic network, which is essential for our public transport.
So you'd say then that the moves away from traditional approaches and embracing technology can certainly help inform local authorities' longer term strategies.
Yeah, I mean, and we're only really scratching the surface of what we're able to do with this technology. So some of the things that we're starting to develop is improve relationships with statutory undertakers with our Section 81 notices. Rather than being completely reactive, we can send them that this is starting to fail, here's an image of it, rather than having to go out straight onto the network and the disruption that causes, and inform our planned maintenance programs.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nick. And actually, just staying with you for a second, Nick, obviously, you touched upon it there, as a council that must regularly carry out safety inspections. You've obviously seen things change a lot and advance in this area. How quickly has that happened? And if you was to put kind of a time scale on it, would you say that it has advanced more quickly in the last few years, or has it been a longer time than that? What kind of changes have you seen?
So I think we've over the past few years we've used sort of the two inspectors in a vehicle for a long time, for a number of years, and that was well defensible in court. We see the technology and developed, and there were a number of different options on the market. A few years ago, there was Gaist were developing from their sort of condition survey, looking at the trial that we have with Safety View. But there was also other things like route shoot and other options from others. So it was something a few years ago that was sort of knocking around, and the ideas that we could start to use technology and image capture, really the defects we were looking at, rather than possibly replacing the inspections. And I think, there are many benefits, but one of the things that the pandemic has done is accelerated that significantly. So I think a lot of companies have recognised that there's a gap there in the market, and they look to fill that. And we've had to quite quickly adapt our maintenance strategies, and in accordance with sort of well-managed highways, to show that how we're undertaking our inspections to meet our requirements. So I think that we've been forced somewhat to accelerate where we were with technology, but I think continuing and sort of being in a positive direction. And I see that. I think the challenge for that is going to be integration between different systems. That's always a challenge, and that's sort of where we're obviously different authorities and different companies have different, and it's how we start to understand that and communicate systems that they use to communicate. That isn't an issue really related necessarily to this. It's something that we're finding challenging as a smart city, how we again get all this data.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nick. And Christina, just coming back to you quickly, often challenges that are put up by local authorities are, as Nick has touched upon, staff and funding. Obviously, a lot of councils facing great challenges in that area, particularly against that backdrop of the pandemic. What would you say to councils, who are considering, making these changes to their inspection regimes in terms of, in some ways, obviously, from what I'm picking up on, that the pandemic has accelerated that. Well, in the case of Bristol, by the sounds of it, from what Nick's saying, and you touched upon the pandemic as well yourself earlier. Has that kind of, if you like, accelerated, as Nick says, that move towards embracing technology, and what would your message be to councils?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two aspects really. One is obviously the practical side of it, and we have touched on that. So there's obviously lots of benefits that have been seen. So the practicalities of doing things in more traditional methods have thrown up quite starkly, that they're not, not as convenient as they have been. But also, again, Steve talked about training for staff, getting them used to looking maybe at a desktop rather than at the road, if you see what I mean, and things like that. Although having said that, all the staff that have been working with us have adapted very quickly to how they use the technology. There's obviously, we looked very closely at the code of practice. We were working with local councils in any case to develop safety views. So we looked very closely at the code of practice and aligning with the risk assessment approach. And I think that's very important as well, that councils, have to understand how that aligns with their own policies and how it fits in, and make sure that their policies do acknowledge that they may be doing inspections in a slightly different way. But I think there's also that conceptual idea again, which we've talked about, is understanding that there can be a lot of benefits in changing the way something's been done. But of course, with driven inspections, it has been done in that way for years and years. So I suppose there's that element of, will it be okay to change a tried and tested method? And I think that's where it's really useful to hear from people like Nick about the ways in which it's been helpful, and the ways in which it's actually brought benefits and advantages. So I think it's understanding that part of it as well, and coming back to, what works best for that particular local authority.
Okay, thank you. And just final questions to you, Nick, very quickly on this section. Just wanted to ask you about, were you met with any resistance to change, and how did you overcome it? It sounds as though, from what you're saying, you've embraced that change, but were you met with any resistance, and did you form a part in trying to help the council overcome that and embrace the technological advances? Oh, can't hear you, Nick.
Yeah, so I think it's human nature to be a bit concerned with change, and can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Can you hear me now? Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly the internet dropped out a bit. Yeah, so there's always sometimes a bit concerned with implementing change, and I think what we did is ensure the inspectors were part of the process when we were introducing this. Obviously, the concern is this is going to replace jobs and people, and we were, right from the outset, explain that isn't our intention at all. This is not why we're doing it. And it was really to show and bring inspectors about, helping them inform the process and then seeing what benefits it brought in. I mean, significantly, there's the safety aspect of the way we were undertaking inspections, particularly on high-speed roads. Trying to pull over, take an image or mark up the defect in the road, and we've removed all of that risk. And a lot of the inspectors appreciate that. They can also see the inspectors are undertaking the inspection from their computers now, and that has led to there's a bit of resistance from that because they're not getting out and about and they're not getting a feel of the road. So you can't replace that element of it. You still need people on the road to understand how the whole sort of network is feeling. But from the safety aspect, and they're seeing real benefits from the fact that we're not quite as reactive as we previously were. We're under increasing pressure not to put traffic management out or to do works in the evening or on weekends, but then we get pressure from residents and the politicians about doing that. So the more ways we can plan work and batch works together and undertake repairs that way, which we're seeing from being able to use digital inspector, safety view, is the real benefit. And the inspectors and officers can see that and they understand that, and so they're all fully supportive of it now. So I think the key is bringing them with you.
Thank you, Nick. So yeah, that brings me on actually to the next part of the conversation, which is how to help highway inspectors through these advances in terms of sort of, I suppose, taking them on the journey with us and how we can help them. And first of all, though, Steve, I know you want to comment on the practice. Do you want to just come in on that point before I ask my next question?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It's only sort of reverting back to the subject you've just been covering about the challenges that councils face in terms of taking this forward and helping it to progress. And Christina touched on this, and I know that Nick did. A lot of work over the years has gone into the code of practice, and it's morphed now to well-managed highway infrastructure. Within there's a large element that talks about safety inspections and competencies and the way it should be looked at. And I know, from my discussions in the past with Christina and with Paula that we're on board with needing to look at that. And that's going to be a little bit of a resistance at the moment, particularly for local authorities, because they will worry. And you will get those legal people that will worry about if it gets taken to court. That book, that code of practice, is the thing that gets slapped on the table more times than most, particularly in terms of injury claims, where a lawyer or a barrister will say, but there's the code of practice, my lad. You need to see what's in here. So as you go through this process, I think that this work needs to be undertaken fairly quickly to help to support. That's a challenge to local councils about how they deal with a newer way of working, whilst working within the confines of the code of practice and the risk and liability guide. And we need to make sure that as one moves forward, the other one moves forward with it. Otherwise, councils will be swimming against the tide in terms of where they might be if they end up in court and they do something that could be perceived. It might not necessarily be, but it could be perceived as being outside the code of practice. And we need to be able to support them in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I'm not sure whether it was yourself or someone else that made the point that as the technology advances, that it's important that councils their own policies align with the code of practice. It might be interesting at that point. So it sounds like what you're saying, Steve, kind of tallies with that.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges that I think we need to accept, and we need to accept that now as we're at the start of this journey. That process needs to be started to look at. If it's going to influence what is in the code of practice, then we need to start that process of redefining what that might be in terms of inspections under the code of practice.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Steve. Let's move over to Paul and bring you back into the conversation, Paul. How important is it that, and again, it's been spoken about to a degree in the conversation so far, but that we maintain a balanced approach between using the technology and the more traditional approaches to highway inspections?
Yeah, so we need the balance really, whilst we've got that testing part of it. So there's certainly going to be a need to run inspections in tandem, the video capture and the traditional. Now, by that I don't mean that we inspect everything twice, but it's really a case of bringing over a small number of routes to begin with. Ensuring that all the inspectors get a chance to try the new technology. What you don't want to do though is hold back too much. And I talked earlier on about having that planned approach. So the plan needs to be a reasonable plan. Now that will be different for each authorities. Some authorities literally have got 2 inspectors, others have maybe got 30, 40 inspection, should I say, rather inspectors. So you need to have a reasonable time for bringing it over. But but by the same token, there should be an end date on that. Even with the with the digital inspections, there is going to be a need where sometimes someone will look at a video and say, I cannot actually determine, where that's what priority that is going to, that particular defect is going to take. So there will still be a need for those inspections, along with, of course, reactive inspections, where there's a report of an issue. And it's been since the last inspection, particularly on some of those inspections that have got the the longer times, the 6 and the 12-month type inspections. So it does need to be a balanced approach, particularly whilst, as Steve was saying, whilst the code of practice is being reviewed, whilst the the liability guidance is being reviewed. I talked earlier about the insurers. Obviously, it's not just your internal insurance section. It's the people that you're actually paying your premiums to, and there are quite a small number of insurance companies generally that insure local authorities, for the liability on the highway. So, they need to be brought in as well. But I think that once the benefits of the digital type inspections are seen, you'll probably find that it'll probably be the insurers as much as anybody else that will that will start to push this. So certainly balanced, as in yes, let's keep both going, but it should be a gradual move over to where this is completed within a reasonable amount of time, and people can move on.
Yeah, would you agree, Steve, that as much as a balanced approach is important, you also do need to set those time frames and some sort of deadlines to keep things moving forward, I guess?
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with what Paul's saying, that it needs in the early stages to have a little bit of a mix and match approach in terms of where you need to retain that in-person inspection at the moment, and where that you can demonstrate immediate benefits from doing some recorded inspections, and I think that we're that those driven ones, and as I said at the very beginning, those higher speed routes, those rural routes where it is more you have to be more safety conscious when you're carrying them out. That would be an absolute benefit. There will be efficiency savings in the speed at which they can be carried out. Inspectors are they are already sort of embracing change. They've moved from notepads and photographs and whatever to taking out tablets, to be able to record, take photographs on site, put their dimensions in, but also to immediately order work through tablets and whatever. So they're ready to embrace it. They just need to make sure that we nurture them, and train them in what they're looking at, how they can use it, the parameters under which they can use it, particularly in the early stages. And make sure that gets enhanced over a period of time. Paul is absolutely right. If you're going to start this process, we don't want to be in 4 or 5 or 6 years' time still talking about the same process and trying to get it embedded. If it's something that we believe can be trialled, can be proven to be used, then we should be setting a time frame to do it. Sitting alongside that, we should be setting the time frame aside to make sure the code of practice, risk and liability is revisited, and that then gives the local authorities the right time span to update their policies and procedures and make sure that their inspectors are au fait with those, that they really understand them. Some of the messages that I get, and I've done some highway inspector training, is that highway inspectors aren't always clear on what their own authorities' policies and procedures, what their investigatory levels are, what the process is for them doing it, and they need to be sort of brought in to that development to help with that. But yes, we need to set a time span. We need to be looking over the horizon and know when we will be able to say we've accomplished what we wanted to do.
And ultimately, obviously, this technology can help keep them safe, as well as road users, in terms of the inspectors. And you touch upon the training and I mean, how important is that going forward, and also collaboration amongst councils? You know, the sharing of this type of technology and case studies and examples of, you know, where it's helped improve other local councils. You know, a big part of LCRIG, that's what we try to do, encourage that collaboration.
Yeah, as I think I said when I answered the introductory, the scene setting bit, it's absolutely important that those that are further down the road, those larger authorities or those authorities that have already bought into this, can share their experiences, and local authorities, councils can work together, and those larger ones can support the smaller ones, sharing of information, sharing of data, sharing of processes and practices, and making sure that it's a real flow of information between authorities. New technology, absolutely, I can see that. You know, if you're doing rather than driven inspections where somebody's mind's not on the road where they're driving, it's being recorded, they know they haven't got to start looking around to look for something. And also, you know, when you're on rural routes, the worst thing you can do is have somebody walking down the road on a rural route, where you've got blind bends, you've got traffic that's moving quite fast. There is a real built-in safety element in here. There's a real built-in efficiency saving in here if it's developed and used in the best way that we can.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Paul, for your contributions in that particular segment. I just wanted to move on now to bring Christina and Nick back in. We're going to be talking about now the dreaded claims that councils sometimes face. So yeah, I guess that is the first question, really. I mean, what type of claims and liability can local authorities face if they don't carry out these highway safety inspections? We'll come to Christina on that one.
Yeah, well, my previous background was in local authority, including responsibility for the safety maintenance regime, so I'm really aware of all the issues and how important it is. So, I mean, local authorities' primary legal defence and primary tool is actually an inspection and maintenance regime. So that includes safety inspections. Obviously, it also includes sort of serviceability and the longer term inspections. But the safety inspections are the ones that really go out and check whether there's anything hazardous to users, as opposed to maybe they're not so good about the assets themselves. So if there was no safety inspection regime, then I think that a local authority would have very little defence if a claim came in, because they wouldn't be able to show that they were actually keeping an eye out and checking for things that could cause problems for users. And obviously it's a very important tool that you know what's going on your highway and that you have rectified things that could give rise to particularly personal injury, but also vehicle damage.
And in what ways can the data be used to counter those claims? What are the sort of things that it can prove, for example?
Yeah, well, as I said, when we were looking at Safety View and the original trial, we looked very much at what local authorities needed, and again, the code of practice and the new, well, I say new, it's not new anymore really, is it? It's been since 2016. But that put a much greater emphasis on making a risk assessment about how, not just the volume of traffic, for example, but how that particular location was used. I'm talking mostly about carriageways because certainly what we offer is a driven inspection solution. But what we specifically developed, we looked at single direction, and Nick talked about the original trial was a fixed camera, but actually what we developed specifically was a 360-degree camera technology alongside the carriageway camera, and actually it's not video, it's still images, which means that the high definition remains. Whatever you do with that image, it's there as a still image. We then knit it into a video for ease of use, and so what was really important about that was the technology assisting what the human eye can do. So the human eye is actually very good at looking around, at filtering, at making sure that it sees things. So what we wanted to do was kind of replicate that in a way that the person looking at it on the desktop can have all the time in the world they need to actually look at what's going on, what's happening around them. One of the issues when you're doing a driven inspection is can you look at what's happening with the signage as well as look at what's happening with the carriageway? The benefit of the 360 is you can look at the carriageway and then you can look at the side of the road, so you can pick up all those other issues that I think particularly in rural locations where you've got long stretches of road without footway, it's really important that you pick up what's going on with those other assets as well that could have an implication to safety for users. So for us that that was a really important part of it, and also obviously making sure that it's everything's geolocated, that you've got, you know, coordinates, that you've got really clear images of the locational context as well. You know, so the risk assessment isn't just about that one particular patch, it's about that locational context, about, you know, what's around, who's using it, is there a lot of people around at that point. So that was all things that were very much looked at during the trial stage. So we didn't really shoehorn existing technology into assisting with safety inspections. We looked at what is it that safety inspections need to help, you know, the local authorities. And I think one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me recently was actually an inspector, a highway inspector, said that they actually had more confidence for some of the more marginal decisions. Because instead of kind of driving over and thinking, was that an investigatory level or not, they've actually got the time to have a look and make a really confident decision about, yes, I do need to intervene, or actually I don't at this level.
And obviously,
people don't say very many nice things to me, but that's the nicest thing I think of. But it was really good to hear.
Well, at least it was a nice thing they said to you. That's the main thing. In terms of data, I mean, data is a real minefield, isn't it? You know, often people with data, you know, what are you really collecting? You know, how important is it? I mean, so with that in mind, I think you've touched upon it a little bit in your answer there. But are there specific ways in which you know, councils can collect data, and how would they think about the needs or the ways in which they could present that to counter a claim, for example, if they were to get one? Are there specific ways in which they, you know, can collect that to help them?
Is that one for me or Nick? Sorry, I didn't hear that bit.
Sorry, I'll follow up for you and I'll come to Nick in a second.
Yeah. Yeah, so absolutely. So the whole point, obviously, of having that auditable record is that it's very visual. And that means if a claim comes in, the local authority can look at that exact location. And the advantage over previous methods is that it's of the entire route. So you might have a claim come in where you haven't taken any action. That could be for a very good reason. But you can look back and you can locate it, not just obviously in terms of the imagery, but also in terms of the time and date. So, you know, the imagery is date stamped, it's obvious about when it was taken. And so you can actually route what's coming in as a claim in what was actually going on the highway at that point. And I think that's a really good starting point for councils to have a good defence, and also to make it a more efficient process. So if you look at it and think, actually maybe we should have done something, you don't have to spend ages wrangling, getting all the way to court on a case that maybe actually is not so likely to win. But if you're absolutely confident, you've got that imagery to back up, and also comparative imagery to show maybe why you acted on a certain location but not on that particular one.
Okay, great. And Nick, I mean, that all sounds pretty invaluable to a local authority. You know, if you're finding yourself in that situation, I guess the more detail, the better.
That's right, Alex. Yeah, and fully support everything Christina said there. And the key is the confidence in the data. And if we didn't have confidence in the data, we wouldn't be using the system. And we've used it a couple of times to repudiate claims. We haven't fully tested it in a court environment. But what's key, and as Christina mentioned, is we can quite easily see where the defect that's being claimed against is. Obviously limited to carriageway at the moment in the way we undertake it. But we can find it. We can see that, you know, say there was a claim in March, but we can see in January and February there was no actionable defect. Okay, March it did develop into an actionable defect, and the March inspection would have picked it up. But at the time before the previous inspections, there wasn't anything that we would constitute as dangerous, and that's really, really important data and information that we can just pass over very easily to the other side and repudiate claims, and we've been successful on that. Previously, what we had to rely on is there wasn't an actual claim because the inspector didn't pick anything up. So you're just entirely relying on the confidence in the inspector, which is, you know, which we obviously have, but that's something that the claimant's legal team will obviously focus on and try to challenge in a court environment. So I think as I said, we haven't been able to test it, but we're probably getting into almost a position where in some claims, if we end up in a court environment, we don't actually have to take inspector to court, because the data is all there, the information is there, and it will come down to dangerousness. And if a judge rules that it's dangerous and we didn't pick it up and it's clear on an imagery, that's something we can learn from. But what that helps to back up and improve is our relationships with our insurer. So Paul touched on this earlier, and it's really important to bring them in, and they've been involved. So Zurich are currently our insurers. So they've been involved in this process and seen what we do and are confident with how we're using the system. If we can, improve the way we're inspecting and repair the network and repudiate the smaller claims, then obviously the bigger claims that might come in for personal injury will probably be more successful, and we're better at, and it gives them the confidence. We're also, as Christina said, we're not necessarily getting quite far down the process of a legal challenge and then deciding actually this isn't that defendable. We can make those decisions much earlier on, and that saves money for the local authority. Very obviously, we're all under pressure with resources, but more importantly, gives a better service to the claimant, to the public. They have legitimately injured themselves or had an inconvenience that's cost them money, and we recognise that early on and paid out, and hopefully we'll learn from that, and the learning from it is also really useful. What the digital inspector, the safety view can do for us, in that it's really easy to share the data we've got and to try and create a bit more consistency with inspectors about what is an actionable defect, what's not, and start to build up that learning pattern again, something that's a key theme in the code of practice.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I'm going to get to the audience questions shortly, but before we do so, I can see we've got quite a few that have come in. So we're on this event till about 12:15, so got about another 25 minutes. But just wanted to tackle the subject of, reaping wider rewards really through an innovative approach. So we've talked about, for example, maintenance efficiencies that can be achieved, Nick, in terms of you touched upon enabling a longer term strategy. But obviously councils are putting an increasing amount of focus on societal benefits. For example, improving air quality, big focus with councils on climate change at the moment, and obviously a lot of deadlines around that and the climate emergency, for example. So in what capacity can advances in highway safety inspections help with things such as this and bring about those societal benefits? I don't know if anyone wants to kick us off on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like Alex. I mean, the societal benefits. Well, first of all, in terms of the the environment, you've got the reduced vehicle miles and emissions, and even if that's electric vehicles, there is a cost on the environment there generating that that electricity. There's better work-life balance for the people involved in these inspections. There's the health and safety. Nobody ever got run over doing a desktop exercise. But ultimately, what we want to do is, societal benefits are actually improving lives for people, making all highways more accessible, making them safe. And if we can get more of the money out of the reactive maintenance and into the planned maintenance, and there's a lot of synergy here with what we're talking about today, then we can have less defects in the first place. And if we've got less defects in the first place with planned maintenance and proper life cycles, then there are great societal benefits there, and that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. And of course, the other one is not just taking the money out of reactive maintenance; it's taking the money out of insurance payouts and the premiums that that go with them. So I think there is. As a result of using technology, there's a lot of benefits for moving things to the right place, making them as they should be, and making highways, more accessible and balanced for for everybody, to the improvements of society overall.
Thanks, Paul. Does anybody else want to sort of come in on the societal benefits? I mean, from your point of view, Nick, is it something that is of increasing importance, I guess, to the residents that you serve, for example?
Indeed, yeah, and to support what Paul said, yeah, obviously we're under new pressures, facing us. Bristol was one of the first, or the first authority, I think, to declare a climate emergency, and so we're under pressure, obviously, to reduce our carbon impact. We're trying to introduce the clean air zone currently, and all that has an impact on the way that we maintain our network. And if we can minimise the number of vehicle journeys we're making, as well as minimising, more importantly, I think will have a greater impact, is minimising the interventions that we do on the network. So therefore reducing the amount of traffic management we put on. Our network is at saturation and far beyond, really, in Bristol. It's one of the most congested cities. And increasingly more pressure is being put on the network because of different programs such as Clean Air Zone and other aspects. So we have to be careful in the way we do manage. And for example, the reallocation of carriageway to provide for sustainable transport, which is obviously the right thing to do, puts more pressure on us to have to be a bit smarter in the way we maintain our network, because it's not as easy just to put out the chapter 8 that we previously would have. We're looking at road closures and other things now. So if we can combine works to make them, as Paul has said, more planned works rather than completely reactive, it all has a big impact on the way our network operates, and thus saving in a lot of the carbon, and just general improvements to the way people get around the network.
Great, thank you, Nick. And Steve, do you want to offer up any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the collection of any data that you can collect, record, and make use of adds to a subject that has been going now for a number of years. Asset management and developing and delivering good asset management plans, making sure that we're using preventative maintenance where we can, rather than the reactive maintenance that requires a partial road closure, going out to repair a small pothole or something in the road. You've then got air pollution because of the vehicles that are queued up there. You've got worker safety in terms of working in those environments. All of that you can cut out just adds to the societal benefits that you gain, and it's more efficient use of the scarce funds that local authorities have got, surely. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the repairs that are done are appropriate and that they will be sustainable. And that they're done in the most cost-efficient way, and all this can add to it in terms of recording it. You start to prioritise your priorities, your plans for some preventative maintenance. You will look at the number of potholes you've recorded in that road. You will look at the number of complaints you've had about it, and all of this collection of data is there as a historical record to help you plan that and prioritise where you need to spend your money more efficiently.
Great, thank you, Steve. And Christina, from your perspective, all part of the messaging and the story, I guess, in terms of those societal benefits.
Yes, I totally agree with what my colleagues have been saying. For me, it really is that, obviously there are the issues about how you manage the fleet and how you do things in the most efficient way, and that's the predominantly initial saving. But it's also about looking at different types of use as well. So you've got the opportunity to look at the roadscape as a network and how lots of different people use it. I know, coming from a predominantly urban authority myself, you'll have just as many people in the carriageway, walkers, crossing the road from one shop to another, for example, or electric scooters, or all sorts of other types of users than maybe your traditional car. And I think it opens up our view of that, the highway network as an interactive network. And then the second thing, I would fully support really what my colleagues are saying about that longer term. And at the risk of giving the impression that I really don't have a very exciting life, it has been absolutely fascinating to see how particular types of damage to the highway develop into defects and under what circumstances. And actually that doesn't have to be complex mathematical deterioration curves. It's that seeing is believing. So I think it's something that Nick's actually concentrated on a lot, and something that for the first time we've got not just geospatial data, so map-based, but we've got really flexible time series in imagery. So you can see that what was wheel track crazing, for example, after a freeze thaw has turned into potholes. And maybe you can compare that to the same defect come summer. If you have better weather, does the same thing happen over the same time period? So it really starts to inform that intelligence about the network and what kind of damage might actually benefit from that longer term approach and that intervention in a more preventative way. And for me as well, that's the real beauty of having that really, as I say, not just geospatial, but that temporal, that time series data.
Okay, great, lovely, Christina. Thanks for that. Thanks for everybody's contributions up to now. I'm just going to move in now to some questions from the audience, of which I can see we've had a few come in. So I suspect some of these might be going in your direction, Christina. So whoever they do go to, if we could keep our answers fairly succinct, and then we'll look to wrap up the event around 12:15. So someone has asked the question here. Will technology ever address the skills shortage of qualified inspectors across the sector?
I think it can help fill in the gaps. If you're more efficient, then you could argue you may, you may make the most of the staff that you have. But I think it's still very important, something I said right at the beginning. I think that human intervention is still a very important part of assessing risk and making decisions on risk. Yeah, Steve, you train highway inspectors, so.
Yeah. I think that there is a skill shortage, and we are part of the way through making sure that we're supporting, training competent inspectors to go out there and do it. And I absolutely agree with Christina. This particularly in the development stage it's at the moment and going forward, isn't the golden ticket that's going to answer our highway inspection claims at the moment. But through its development, it will improve it. You will always need a highway inspector. You will always need somebody with an element of competence and understanding, both of what they're looking at and the policies and procedures that need to be followed to be able to decide what to do about something you pick up on the network. I think what it will do is it will increase the acknowledgement that we have of highway inspectors and the important role that they take in terms of keeping the network safe.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Sorry, bear with me. I'm just going through these questions. One for you, Christina, again here. So many of the trials appear to have been in more built-up areas such as Bristol. Are there trials being undertaken for shire authorities that have a large rural network?
Yeah, so the other council predominantly after the initial DFT trial who worked with us as beta testers was Cumbria, and we took on their rural high-speed network. And they did actually have to previously hire an impact protection vehicle for some of their network because of that, because it's quite a constrained rural network, lots of hills and bends. So we kind of just did away with that immediately. And obviously, again, those benefits are that you can cover a huge amount of kilometres, picking up both roadside issues and carriageway issues. So a lot of signage issues, perhaps, things that get knocked by vehicles going past, that might not get picked up otherwise. Warning signs where, they're not facing the direction of the user. It might sound like small things, but those are the sort of things that also give rise to claims. So yes, we definitely tested it, not just in urban environments, but also in rural environments, and actually, some difficult winter conditions as well. So yes, and whenever we work with local authorities, actually we get more and more information as well about different types of not just carriageway issues, but roadside assets. And rural and urban can be very different.
Okay. We've had a couple of questions I can see come in relating to insurance. So I'll kind of try and wrap them into one question if I can. So firstly, where does tech data sit with insurers and hence claims, and is it dependent on the technology? And as a supplementary question to that, how has the insurance sector been convinced to embrace and accept the use of new technologies in terms of defending claims? I think Nick, you talked a bit about, I'll come to you first on this actually, because you talked a little bit about how your insurer has kind of, you've informed them of this as you've gone through the process. But if you bear in mind those questions, I don't know if you can reflect upon that maybe within your answer.
Yeah, so like I said, we engaged quite early on with Zurich through the trial that we did with the DFT. It happened that I think the authorities, all three authorities that were involved in the primary trial were Zurich insured anyway. And so they're pleased with the fact that we're capturing a lot of data and imagery. I'm not sure about other people when they're defending claims, but often we're relying on Google imagery. We're always presented by Google imagery from claimants, and we can counter a lot of that now with our own efficient, much more accurate imagery. And I would urge anyone to have a look at the Gaist websites to see about the quality of the imagery they can have a look at, or come see me and give you examples. And it's really easy to give accurate information on. So the other option we had in the pandemic was to try and do inspections with one inspector, and they were very much against that. So it was really sort of probably a hand was forced somewhat because of COVID, but again we've seen the real benefits of that, and there's full confidence in what we're doing.
Okay, and Christina, do you want to just pick up on the point, those couple of sort of points or remarks around insurance?
Yes, so we have engaged with insurers. As Nick said, Zurich were part of the original inspection. We also took a lot of legal advice from contributors and peer reviewers to the Code of Practice and the IHE's risk and liability document to make sure that we're placing ourselves alongside councils to minimise risk, not to increase that in terms of exposure to claims. I think for the insurance industry as well, obviously there's been a lot of change for them recently. So last year they had to look at all sorts of different methods of collecting driven inspection data. So I think one of the particular issues, one thing that's really important, is also the quality of the information. That it is information that can give confidence to insurers that actually it's telling them the right sort of things to defend claims. So yeah, I think it's important. I think again, from Cumbria as well as with Nick, there's been quite a few claim repudiation at a very early stage, but I'm sure everyone's watching to see what happens when imagery goes to court.
Okay, and a final question from the audience here, which is really looking at technological advances, which is concerning the use of good examples of current technological advances in highway inspections. Will the use of drones have a greater influence on this work? This questioner asks, I can think of double white line surveying, in-depth crash investigations and road safety audits as having major benefits from this field of work. So they're talking about, drone technology perhaps coming in. Is that something you've witnessed in your experience, Christina? Is that something that's become commonplace, perhaps?
Yeah, Gaist used drone technology actually a while ago, back after the terrible flooding Cumbria had, and we used drones to look at the damage to where roads had collapsed along cliff faces, so where it would have been very difficult to have sent, people to look. And also we're very interested in all sorts of different uses of camera technology, so we collaborated with BridgeCat, which looked at underwater technology. And I think that, there are already trials with drones, and drones are doing a lot, but there are issues about how much data it can record and send back. So one of the things that people don't always think about is that connectivity. So how much can you store if you can't automatically send that data back? And if you can send it back, is it of the right quality that you need to? So those are all issues that just need to be explored. They're not insurmountable. Obviously, it can make a difference depending what environment you're in as well. And then finally, in urban areas, in fact, I think there's currently the law is that you can't go too close to X amount of people. So I think you need to be very careful of all the things that drones can interfere with. Again, not insurmountable, but there's a lot of issues that need to be worked out. Nick had his hand up.
I think you're right, Christina. Just on that point, I think there are limitations as to areas that you can fly them in, and I know that in the energy network space, for example, a number of the networks use drones to inspect some of their assets. But yeah, sorry, Nick, you wanted to come in on that point.
Yeah, just to so we've quite recently successfully sort of inspected a lot of our harbour assets. They're in really poor condition, to be honest, a lot of our harbour walls and bridges. And previously that would have had to be done either from barges, and then obviously because of the Avon, got really significant tidal pressures there. And that was all done, through drone work, saved us thousands and thousands of pounds. But with that, it still takes someone to sit down and go through all the imagery and look at it and assess it, and it doesn't replace any of that. And I can't see how drone would do from that sort of perspective. Obviously, the technology we're using in Gaist and other people have is using AI to identify assets and type of like road lining. We're using, or we've done a process with Gaist last year, or a year ago, to map and assess all our markings. So we used it against TSRGD, and we've now got a different, an extensive map of our whole city about what line type is where and the condition of that line. And that helped us inform and put a bid in to try and get funding to improve our lining. And a lot of that was around the central parking zones and enforcement to make sure that we were able to defend parking fines effectively. The final comment I've got is increasingly I think we can start to use the technology to look at schemes, and I don't know whether Paul's got opinion on this, from road safety audits, is to start recording it from person's perspectives. For example, a camera on a bicycle, a camera on a scooter, a camera on a someone walking, and that gives a very different perspective than maybe sort of traditionally we would have engineers just looking how a scheme might operate rather than going through it and feeling it. And I think that's certainly something we want to explore further.
Paul, have you got any thoughts on there? Nick was asking if you had any comments on that latter point before I ask a sort of summary question. No, you still with us, Paul?
Oh, sorry, Alec. No, I don't think I've got anything further to add on that one. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. So I just wanted to ask, obviously, I think very much on the event today, hopefully to some degree we have made the case for change, albeit, keeping that balance in mind. I guess as a summary question to you all in no more than really, less than a minute each, before we wrap up. What one thing, and safety, sorry, I should say safety obviously remains, I think, at the heart of everything that we're doing. That really should be the number one priority at all times for councils, and really ring true. But what one thing can or should be done then to advance safety inspections, if councils can take anything away from this today, and they want to progress in that way, what can they put at the top of the to-do list? Should we go to Nick first?
I think it's taking a step back and realising what issues you've got. So if you've got a rural network or an urban network, the technology can benefit in different ways. Like Christina said, instead of looking at in an urban environment, we are predominantly looking at just carriageway because we have to inspect the footways regularly anyway from a walk inspection. But when you're in a rural environment, then you can use the technology maybe to look from boundary to boundary and pick up all your defects and all your issues there. So I think it's clearly understanding what gaps you're trying to fill, or what problems you're trying to solve, and then look at what technology is out there, or invite some of the companies in to offer what they can do. We're fortunate enough that we've been working with Gaist for quite a while doing our condition survey, because we weren't confident in the scan of data that we were getting. So we were already engaged with a technology company there to some extent, and that's why we entered the trials with the DFT over that. So I think it's just about using those communications, things like LCRIG obviously as well, to engage with that.
Thank you, Nick. And Paul, on to you. I'll just do it in the order on my screen.
Yeah, okay. I mean, in terms of safety, we all instantly think of the carriageway defect and the potholes, but the reality is that on average about 50% of the safety defects that are generally picked up are not carriageway related. So the curbs, footways, trees, fences, or all those other things, and you know, from my experience, a lot of those that are picked up outside of the carriageway probably do not need to be as reactive as they, you know, as they're generally recorded. And if we can decrease the amount, you know, the amount of them that are picked up on a risk-based approach, you know, using that technology, then we can, you know, we can improve a lot more safety, you know, on the carriageways where we've got most of the, you know, most of the wear and most of the, you know, the high impact injuries, and where quite honestly, people pick up, you know, that's what they do. They point to the potholes. They don't point to some of those other things that could be done far easily more as planned maintenance, and that, you know, that it does improve safety.
Thank you, Paul, and Steve. Just very quickly, if you don't mind.
Talk to and engage with the inspectors. They're the ones that are out there doing the inspections. They know where the difficulties lie. You need to be able to demonstrate to them what you can support them with. Just get them involved. Actually get them to identify to you where some of these difficult areas are for us to accomplish.
Yeah, good advice. And then Christina, final word to yourself.
Yeah, I think the public themselves have a lot of data and kind of a lot of means now to collect data. And I think, you know, our role is to support local authorities by either filtering or collecting data and presenting it in ways that they can use really easily, and to, you know, to sort of be prepared for things like claims, but also to really look after public safety, you know, in the way that Paul was talking about, or Steve, you know, where we're actually concentrating on the things that really matter, and we're making immediate difference, and then also building up a picture of the other things that we need to do, and doing those in a perhaps a more planned way.
Great, thank you very much. And just remains for me to say thank you very much to all of our panelists today. I think it's been a really interesting session, and hopefully will, you know, give councils food for thought on how they can, you know, make the case for change in advancing their safety inspections. And again, keep an eye out on obviously LCRIG channels. This will be available to watch on demand in due course, and keep an eye on our Reach the Market for news of upcoming webinars, etc. as well. And yeah, it just remains for me to say thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks very much.